Today I'm talking to Terry Angelos. Terry is a visual artist and she's also a wife, a mother of 3 adult children, and she's been a follower of Jesus for 32 years. So Terry, welcome and thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Morning, Vida. It's wonderful to spend time with you today.
Now, you are an author of a brand new book that has been on the bestseller list for the last, I think, more than 6 months now already. And it is quite a quite a remarkable book. So if you can hold it up just to show. So it is called White Trash, My Year as a High-Class Call Girl. And I'm going to read the back of the book just to share what it's about. It says, hungry for adventure and wildly curious, 19-year-old Terry Angelos drops out of her fine art degree in South Africa and escapes to London, where she soon descends into the city's seedy underbelly to begin working as a high-class call girl. By the time she's 20, she's embroiled in the underworld of Chinese mafia, depraved clients, and a perilous blackmail scheme. In a remarkable turn of events, at her lowest point, she finds a seed of hope in a crowded tourist hut. Her journey towards redemption is both magnificent and miraculous, as she embarks on a heroic quest to reinvent herself. And the heading says, White Trash is a remarkable memoir told in vivid detail, laced with dark humor and savage honesty. Now, I've looked at some of the reviews, and some people said, one person said, as soon as they heard about God, they actually were put off by the book. And another person said, obviously it is remarkable. They admire the very deep honesty that you write the book. But the question comes like, why did you decide to write the book and to share about a past that is extremely, difficult, and the subject matter of the book is very challenging as well. So why did you decide to write it?
Vida, first of all, I think that review you refer to is the one and only negative review about talking about God in the story. Just to give some perspective on that, the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and I get messages on my phone, on my social media, almost on a daily basis from women thanking me for being so honest and vulnerable, and recognizing the bravery and the courage that it took to write the story. When I was 19 and I literally dropped out of my fine art degree, packed one little backpack, took a sleeping bag, and literally had, I think, enough money left over after paying for my ticket to last 3 days in the big city of London. And at the time, I just felt this incredible sense of destiny, a pulling me to London. My parents just about disowned me. They were furious. But I had this overwhelming feeling that something life-changing was going to happen to me in London. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I had to go. The only time I've ever felt that exact same just pull and sense of purpose was at the beginning of last year, when I really committed to writing and finishing this book. And it was just a sense of enormous purpose about telling my story of shame, but also of redemption, and just believing that it's a story that could offer hope to anybody who's really messed up, anybody who's carrying shame. And if one out of 4 women have experienced some kind of sexual trauma, some kind of violence, some kind of shaming experience, that's a lot of women out there who need to actually hear that you can move through that and that you can rebuild your life. But there were a number of reasons, but I think that highlights one of them.
Okay, I think what you have shared is true, that a lot of responses than what I have seen, have been positive. But the reason why I said that is that there are two ways of looking at it. Like for some people, people look at the book and the title, and it sounds very titillating, and that is sort of kind of the thing that they want to focus on. That's why the person said, the minute you mention God, they don't want to hear about God. That sort of put them off. But at the same time, like you said, it is such a story that is encouraging, and uplifting. And how long did it take you to write the book, and was it very difficult for you to do so?
It's a project I started about 3 years ago, and I wasn't going to do anything in terms of publishing or putting it out there until my children were grown up and out of the school environment, because I just feel like school's really that little fishbowl community where everyone's looking in, and I wanted them to be able to engage with me on the process of writing the book and putting it out so publicly as adults, as grown-ups, and that as a family we could all be on board with this. If my children and my husband were not okay, this would not have gone forward. But I just wanted to touch, you just mentioned, the cover and kind of this titillating, this idea of things that were, this kind of seedy background, whatever this, when I looked at the landscape of memoirs around sex workers and call girls, all the covers were very raunchy looking, with kind of girls in, fishnet stockings and stilettos, and, with kind of really selling that story. And so what I've tried to do with my cover is actually portray a girl who's very vulnerable, but also the title White Trash also alludes to the fact that a lot of racism and uncovering and healing from racism is also dealt with in the book, and that it doesn't have that very typical look and feel. It's a lot edgier, it's a lot more layered, there's a lot more innuendo in the book. And obviously when you turn and read the back cover, it does talk about this process of redemption.
Yeah. So without giving too much away, about the content of the book, if you can just explain sort of like what that year was all about that you write about. But then also I think in the book you touch about, there's basically two things. It's that year that you spend in London, but then also you talk about, racism, and how you grew up in the old Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe, and I think growing up in South Africa or living in South Africa, where race is so much part of, it's out there, it's what we know, and it is what we also have to guard against. It's so much part of our history. So those are the two sort of main things that come out in the book. And if you can just sort of expand a little bit on that.
Yeah, in actual fact, I think when it came to being brave and courageous, I actually felt a lot more risk around speaking openly about what it means to grow up in a white, racist, supremacist culture, and what it means to actually recover from that, because I think it is a process of recovery. There's two ways in which I felt like I had compromised my humanity and actually become dehumanized, devalued to the point that I saw myself as worthless. And the one was through sexual experiences and promiscuity, and then getting to the point where it actually became a transaction. And the other thing was around race, because I think what a lot of, I can only speak for white people, a lot of white people struggle with the idea of owning up to their racism because they think it makes them bad people. Like, I'm a good person, so I can't be racist. And I really wanted to kind of just almost drop a bombshell on this whole concept and actually talk about race in the most unsanitized way possible. And I had done some of this in a workshop with the lady with Melinda Ferguson, who ended up publishing my book. And it was so explosive that I shelved the book for 2 years because I just thought, no, this is just, it's so volatile and there's so much emotion around it. But there was a lady in that room who was a very mature, an older Black woman who was a professor. And she just quietly, at the end of all this kind of very explosive discussion in this workshop, said, "That's the most refreshingly honest thing I've heard." And because I'd written about some things around my father as well, she said, it's very easy for us not to see one another's humanity. And so I think it was all about that, about just what does it mean to be human, and dealing with these things, and how do we recover our humanity, our lost humanity. And so, yeah, there's kind of this parallel journey, and it's interwoven. And I also thought, I don't think a book like this actually really exists in the world. Yeah, so that was a very important part of the book for me.
Yeah, it is very, very refreshingly honest. And I think also what makes it so is, I think if you look at the time that we live in, like talking about race and racism, is very, very difficult and uncomfortable for people.
Yeah.
So if you think of like, you already shared about how the book is one of hope, and helping people to see that, you can change. It's about redemption, But then in terms of like race, how would you, or what impact would you like it to have on those who read it?
I think first of all, just an acknowledgement of how damaging a skewed worldview is, because, so I'm going to probably ramble a bit here, but I'm going to try and dig into this. So part of this book was a quest to actually find answers for myself, because I didn't understand, how does a girl who is not, comes from a middle-class family, a loving, stable, somewhat stable nuclear home, private school educated, really every opportunity is given to her. How does she just kind of fall down into this kind of dark place? And so this book was kind of a search, almost like a cold case, to kind of open up the file and really dig through. And part of that digging through was actually going back to that, what it was like to grow up in a very deeply divided society, grow up during a civil war. And I mean, in South Africa, we haven't had a civil war per se, but the same kind of violence, the same kind of trauma around race. And I think just acknowledging how damaging that is, not just to the victim, but to the perpetrator. I get quite emotional about this, because I think it's something that we've got to acknowledge as the social trauma. And it's so easy, I think, for, certainly I hear some people say, apartheid was so long ago, just get over it, kind of thing. But we're not acknowledging how deeply traumatic those things are. And I had the incredible opportunity to sit with, some of you will know David Gondongwa. I'm saying it right. They came to us for dinner one night. He was running the Comrades Marathon, and we sat around the table and spoke about those times where we both were in that society. He literally would have killed my father if they'd come across each other in the bush, and my father likewise. They were on complete opposite ends. But as we spoke about our experiences, we found we had an enormous amount in common in terms of being people who sought high risk activities, not belonging, feeling like you're on the fringes of society, needing adrenaline. There were kinds of ways in which that played out in both of our lives, even though we were not in the same experience. And I found that very interesting. So, so yes, it was kind of acknowledging the role that played in who I became, this risk taker, this person of immune to danger, this person craving this feeling of being alive, but through all the wrong things, and losing a sense, having lost some kind of humanity, I suppose.
Yeah. I think, that part that you share, about meeting up with David and like, just sharing about how you came from the same country, and had such different experiences. Like they say, you were afraid of terrorists, but on the other side, that terrorist was somebody's freedom fighter, and just to see
Exactly.
how the way that we grow up, shapes our beliefs, shapes, our values, and, has such a profound impact on us, because I think that also comes through in your book as well,
Yeah.
and then at the same time, that you find that when you sit down with somebody, that you would consider your enemy, that you can find common ground, that you find that you actually have so much in common, but that, sadly, the way that we grow up, and the government and the policies and all these things can push you in one way, and to see that at the end of the day, you are human. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
it's about really finding out what you have in common, and then to find out that you actually have so many different things that you can talk about, common experiences, basically,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and
I think the thing is that the outcome of those experiences was the same. The experiences were different, obviously, but the whole racial construct is only held up if we demonize the other.
Yeah.
And so my childhood experience was all about black is dangerous, black is the boogeyman, black is the person who's going to come in the night and slit your throat. The black is the person who's going to take away everything you love about your life, your home, your family. And so that's the lens through which I grew up. Now, exactly the same thing is happening on the other side of the racial divide. White is demonized. White is the enemy. White has taken everything from us. So this is where I think story and telling story is so incredibly powerful, because if you and I sit around a table and we tell each other our stories, and we feel safe enough to be honest, because I think that's another problem that comes in. We need to create safe spaces where people feel like they can tell their story. Then the commonality and the humanity can be found, and compassion for one another.
Yeah. And also, the one thing that I think is striking is that, I mean, we are now since, 95? It's quite a long time since we are in a democratic country, but the problem is that you can change the laws, but people's hearts, may not change, or might not have changed since that time, even though. And I mean, the difference for you, obviously, is finding God. And if you can just share a little bit, about that, because part in the book you share about during that year you got to the point where you felt at your lowest point, where you say you felt washed up and washed out, and then you were hoping for a miracle, you were searching for God. So if you can just share a little bit about how you actually came to find God.
Absolutely. So I mean, this is one of the biggest reasons for writing the book, was to share my story as widely as possible. At the age of 19, I'd done pretty much everything. I had kind of not set any limits on myself. So drugs, sex, adventure, wild adventures, crazy living, extraordinary luxury, lots of money. So at that age, I couldn't. There was no newness left. There was only more of the same. I could only do more drugs, more holidays, more luxury, more kind of sexual experiences, more manipulation, more exploitation, more greed, more. And so at the age of 20, when I looked to my future, I was terrified because I just could not see a future. And everything that when I thought about having a family, being married, having children, having all of those things, I just thought I'd trash that. I'd literally thrown my life away. The only thing that I hadn't really explored, because there's a theme of curiosity that comes through in this book, being a very curious person. The only thing I'd not been curious about was God. And so I literally had this very honest conversation with God to say, okay, God, look, it's clear I've really made a mess of things. I don't deserve a second chance. But if you are real, take me to your people. That was my prayer. Take me to your people. And so probably the last third of the book really kind of follows that story. And it's not just about the conversion or about finding God. It's about all the rewiring and all the things you have to deal with when you come from a very worldly, extremely worldly, very arrogant and prideful and brash and broken and traumatized background, because there had been some severe trauma that I'd experienced in that life as a call girl. And so it's also about that process of kind of just finding yourself again, finding a way to I think rewiring is the best way to put it, because I think a lot of people just look at the obvious things. Okay, get out of that lifestyle, get a job, but the work is internal. The work is dealing with the fact that you've been an extremely manipulative person, that to do that kind of work, you have to put on this persona, you have to shapeshift, is how I describe it. You bury your own self so far deep down in there, or you dissociate. So I also wanted to talk about that recovery journey as part of what it means to give hope, and then talking about purity, having a pure relationship. So the journey takes up until actually getting married as a Christian woman, being celibate for 5 years. And it's amazing how many of people have come back and said how much they love that part of the story, actually the healing journey, as well as kind of, like you say, kind of it does go to some dark places, and it does take you into a world that probably you've not been in before, really an inside kind of expose of what it's like to live and move in those spaces. It was really important for me to write it in a way that was not religious. And so hence the title, hence the byline, My Year as a High Class Girl. Because I was not a church girl, I was not a religious person. I was very cynical. And, there's a boy in the book that I had a fling with that I call, a Jesus freak, a Jesus boy or whatever, because I also wanted to show coming from that background. And so I wanted it to be very accessible to people who were not churchgoers, who were not religious. So I've avoided all of that kind of religious terminology and taken myself back to that 19, 20-year-old girl, how she experienced God, which wasn't as a religious person. It was very raw. It was very real. It was, I really related to the woman who wept at Jesus's feet. I related to the broken woman in the story and found Jesus in that. And that's what I wanted to convey. And I think I'm hoping the book will reach people who don't necessarily go to church and see God in a really refreshing and real and honest and different way.
Yeah. And then what has or how has your picture of God changed, as a result of what you had gone through?
I think, like I mentioned, I was able to see myself in the broken woman in the story, see Jesus' compassion. The very first message that I heard, the first sermon that I heard was in London, and it was, "Are you sick or are you dying?" And I just wept because I said, I'm dead. It's not about dying. I'm dead. And the story was Lazarus was raised from the dead. And so I think I was just able to apply all of those things and say, okay, but I'm dead, but God can raise me from the dead. I'm damaged, but God can heal me. I've lived with demons. God can cast them out. So I think my experience of the scriptures was that I could see myself in those people and in those stories, and I could see God's response, which was compassion, love, healing, rescue. And so for me, a lot of those, I was just sharing at an event recently that a lot of those terms that are kind of religiously redeemed, saved, God's grace, those were not just religious words to me. Those were words that saved my life. That was like, I'm redeemed. I'm new again. So it was just really believing what the Bible said about how God saw me and seeing myself in those verses.
Yeah, it is quite amazing, like I think, like you said, to look at it, like not so much from the traditional sort of like religious way. I think, that we grow up, we live in a very religious country, and but then the other thing is also,
Yeah.
since you've written the book, you've been at you've talked about it so much. Has it become easier for you to talk about it and to share your story? And then the other question that follows from that is, have you found that there are some people that look at you who sort of felt like they've known you, and who look at you in a different way because like now they know so much more about Terry than what they've ever known before?
Look, there's still moments when, because it is now, I honestly thought, Vida, that, some friends, maybe family, a handful of people would read the book. Honestly, the response to the book has been just unbelievable. And so it's a lot more public than I anticipated, which there are moments when I go, oh. I have those freak out moments. I think the first time I saw just before the book came out, there was a newspaper article and they asked me to send a picture, and the picture, I hadn't done my hair properly. It was the only picture I had of me holding the book. My roots were showing. And I thought, no, that's fine. It'll just be this like little thing in the paper. And it was like a half-page spread and this. Oh yeah, it's a mixture. And I think the thing is that when I actually started this, I really committed to writing and publishing this book in a year as a follow-on from some classes that Kit Cummings did around 40 days of prayer. And you said, write an impossible prayer. And that was my impossible prayer, to write and publish in a year. And I think, so this book was done with so much prayer, and it was a very difficult process to go back to that trauma and to write about things that I'm so deeply ashamed of. But because I prayed so much about it, I really felt like it's all been in God's hands. And so that always takes me back to a place of, okay, I know that I did this with God, and I know God's with me, and I know that I really believe that this is what God called me to do, that this was the right time. And it's actually been such a great benchmark for what it means to really do something that you've 100% surrendered to God in, and really let God lead me and guide me in every little detail, even about when to put swearing in and why and how to write about sexual details in a way that tells the story without it being unnecessarily salacious, to really get to the root of the truth, not just the truth of X, Y, Z happened, but the emotional truth, the psychological truth. yeah, and so I mean, sometimes I look at things in the book and I can't believe I wrote it. I think God really helped me write that book, because there are things that just came out and memories that came up, and so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but it's just, yeah, it's just so rooted in prayer and a sense of I'm really living in God's purpose for my life right now. I've never felt that as strongly as I do now.
Okay. And then, was there any scriptures at the time that you studied the Bible or while you were writing the book that really comforted you or you sort of held on to?
So I think I think I've shared a bit about when I studied the Bible, but just I always go back to Psalm 118. Psalm 18, sorry, that talks about how God reaches down to rescue us. It leads us to a place of safety because he rescued me because he delights in me. And then I think just Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, it says in the NLT version, it says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things he planned for us long ago." You know, as I said earlier, I always felt like there was something fundamentally wrong with me, that I just made such abnormal choices and did such crazy things. It's just believing that God knew what he was doing when he created me, and that he created me for a purpose. And so I think it's just been believing that, and I think not only just about sharing the story, but I think the process of writing the book has actually been healing on another level for me personally. And I think just being able to finally let go of some of the shame and some of those questions around what's wrong with me, why am I so reckless, and I think it's held me back in my life, even as a disciple, this feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with me. So I think I'm really at peace with who I am, that I am God's masterpiece, that I have been called to do something that God had planned for me a long time ago. And I think one of the things is to be bravely honest.
Yeah, I think you really have been in this book. And I think just, when you think of the title, I think when I saw it, was like, oh, why would she think of herself like that? And I mean, obviously, as I read your story, I understood, but I think also, as you share about studying the Bible and finding, meeting Jane and all of that, that you did wonder, so are you worthy of God's love? And I mean, that's the one part that really, really touched my heart so much, and I think it is something that a lot of people, but especially women struggle with a lot, to really believe that you are truly loved, that God loves you, just the way that you are, and that your past doesn't matter, that God loves you anyway, So I want to ask, you've written this book now. Would you are you considering writing anything else, along those things to sort of expand on those? Because I think those are very, very important topics, and very important things that for us to realize, it's just in terms of like how much God values us, and that when Satan tells us lies, about the past, and that he accuses us, that there's always hope, that we can always run to God and not away from him. So
yeah, I learned so much about shame and vulnerability, about what it means to be brave. And I think it's definitely something that I think is one of the reasons the books resonated so much with with women and with people in particular, because it's very easy for us to talk about toxic habits in our interpersonal relationships. This has become very kind of part of the kind of psychotherapy landscape, is what is toxic. Shame is a toxic emotion that is directed at yourself. And so shame is often something that we carry towards ourselves. And it's different to guilt. Guilt is, I did something wrong and I need to change it. I need to repent. I need to make amends. Shame is, I am bad. I am unworthy. And so that's why I think it can still be so debilitating, even as a baptized, forgiven Christian. We can still carry shame. And the biggest thing that actually overcomes shame is compassion and empathy. And so even though I would often look back on my past, but judge myself as, if I look at myself looking back as a 50-year-old woman who's had a lot of life experience, who's matured, who's grown, who's understood different things, who's had spiritual input, I look back on that 20-year-old girl with a lot of judgment. How could you? How stupid, how foolish, whatever. But in writing the book and going back and being that 20-year-old girl, because I wrote everything in the present tense, being that teenager, being that young girl, I was able to be much, much more compassionate to myself. And that is the thing that dissipates shame, is compassion. And that, that is why, some people might think, oh, well, God knows my sin, I know my sin, why do I need to speak about it? When you speak about your shame or your sin in a safe space, let me just put that disclaimer there, and the person responds with compassion, that is the healing. That is what is healing about confession, is that person says, you know what, I felt that same thing, or I also messed up that way, or I also have those thoughts, and let me pray with you, and I'm so sorry you went through that. That is the thing that helps shame more than anything else. Compassion to yourself, compassion and empathy from others. And so when you don't share the things you feel ashamed of, you rob yourself of the opportunity to experience that compassion and that empathy.
Yeah.
That you're not alone.
Yeah, that's true. Well, we've actually run out of time now, so I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story, and I'll put the details in the description of where people can find it. But thank you so much for sharing it.